My name is Hannah, and I am 28 years old. I work as a freelancer, juggling late-night projects and tight deadlines while chasing clients around the world. I never imagined one dinner could change everything. I walked into Jake's family home thinking it would be normal, but the moment we sat down, his dad looked me dead in the eye and called me street garbage. My heart stopped. I froze. Before I tell you everything that happened next, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe, because these stories of betrayal, courage, and shocking twists happen every week. And trust me, you don't want to miss a single one. I had been dating Jake for over a year, and honestly, I was excited to finally meet his parents. He had described them as traditional but welcoming, and I wanted everything to go smoothly. I even spent hours picking out the perfect outfit, making sure I looked neat, polished, and respectable. When we arrived, his dad, Greg, shook my hand, or at least that's what I thought. He barely glanced at me, then muttered something under his breath about another girl wasting her time. I shrugged it off, assuming he was just grumpy, maybe stressed from work. Jake was smiling nervously, clearly hoping his dad would lighten up. But I felt a prickling in my chest, the kind you get when you know something bad is about to happen. And I was right. Dinner started politely enough, plates were passed, and polite conversation attempted. But then Greg leaned back, looked at me, and said it, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. Honestly, I don't know why Jake is wasting his time with someone like you. You're just street garbage. I froze. My fork clattered onto the plate. For a moment, I thought I misheard him. Maybe it was a joke? But the cold smirk on his face told me it wasn't. The room went quiet. Even Jake's mom seemed unsure whether to scold her husband or apologize to me. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. But instead, I took a deep breath, forced a smile, and replied, calm but icy, "Excuse me?" My voice shook, but I wasn't about to cry in front of them. Not tonight. No one spoke for what felt like an eternity. Jake's mom mumbled something about his dad being tired, trying to change the subject, but it didn't help. Greg crossed his arms, leaning back as if he had just won some cruel game. I felt a mix of anger and humiliation bubble inside me. How could someone treat another human being like this right in front of their family? My mind raced. Should I yell? Storm out? Or should I stay calm and show them that I wouldn't let anyone demean me? Finally, I decided on silence, at least for now. I picked up my fork and continued eating, every bite feeling like a victory. I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Jake looked horrified. "Dad, that's not fair," he whispered. I could see the struggle on his face. He wanted to defend me, but he also didn't want to start a war with his father. I reached out and gently held Jake's hand. "It's okay," I whispered back. "I can handle this." But inside, I was shaking. How could the person I loved most stand there silently while his father insulted me? Part of me wanted to run, yet another part wanted to prove that I wasn't street garbage at all. Dinner ended awkwardly. Jake didn't say much to me on the drive home. I knew he was embarrassed, but I also knew something had shifted. Nothing would ever feel normal with his family again. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, replaying every word Greg had said. My mind was a storm of hurt, anger, and disbelief. How could someone be so cruel just because they didn't approve of me? Then I made a decision, one that would change everything. I wasn't going to beg for approval. I wasn't going to tolerate disrespect. If Jake's father wanted to see me as street garbage, that was his problem. But I would never let anyone make me feel worthless again. Little did I know, my next move would shock not only Greg, but Jake, his mother, and everyone who thought they could put me in my place. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about what Greg had said. I replayed every word, every sneer, every look of disgust. Anger mixed with determination. I knew I had two choices: either let it crush me or use it as fuel to prove my worth. I started making a plan, not revenge, but a way to show my self-respect and boundaries. I would no longer allow anyone, not even Jake's father, to belittle me. I would confront the situation calmly, strategically, and with dignity. It was time they learned that words have consequences. Even though my heart still ached from the insult, I felt a spark of power. For the first time that week, I realized I could take control of the situation without compromising who I was. A few days later, Jake invited me to his home again. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go, but I also knew avoiding it would make me seem weak. I decided to attend, not for Greg, but for myself and my own pride. As soon as I walked in, Greg shot me a look like he had won a battle. I smiled politely, my calm demeanor contrasted sharply with his smugness. "We need to talk," I said softly, addressing him directly while everyone else watched. His eyes narrowed. Jake's mother looked nervous, but I ignored her apprehension. It was time to face this head on. I wanted Greg to understand that respect is earned, and being cruel to someone just because you disapprove is unacceptable. Greg smirked and said, "And what do you want to talk about, street garbage?" My stomach twisted, but I took a deep breath and stood taller. "I want you to stop calling me names," I said firmly. "I'm here with Jake because I love him, not to fit into your expectations, and I deserve respect, just like anyone else." The room went silent. Jake looked like he was holding his breath, unsure what would happen next. Greg chuckled, thinking I was bluffing, but I wasn't. I could feel the strength in my voice, the authority behind my words. Even his mother seemed surprised. Maybe for the first time, she realized that I wasn't just going to take abuse silently. I had made my line clear. I would not tolerate disrespect from anyone, regardless of their title or family connection. Jake finally spoke up, his voice low and hesitant. "Dad, maybe you went too far." Greg's eyes flicked toward him, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He wanted to defend me, but he was afraid of confrontation. I reached for Jake's hand under the table, giving him a reassuring squeeze. "It's okay, Jake," I whispered. "I can handle this. You don't have to fight my battles. Just support me, and that's enough." Jake nodded, visibly relieved. I realized in that moment that this situation wasn't just about Greg. It was about setting a standard for how we treated each other. I couldn't rely on Jake to protect me. I had to protect myself first. By the end of the evening, Greg hadn't apologized, but I felt victorious. I had held my ground, spoken my truth, and refused to let anyone label me with cruel words. For the first time, I saw the fear flicker in his eyes. He wasn't used to being challenged. Jake stayed quiet for the drive home, still processing the confrontation. I could feel his admiration mixed with confusion. I wasn't sure if this would make things easier or harder in the future, but I knew one thing: I had taken the first step towards establishing my dignity. And deep down, I felt an unexpected thrill. The next time Greg tried to insult me, he wouldn't find the same scared, quiet girl he had called street garbage. A week after the confrontation, I ran into Greg at a local cafe, unexpectedly. My heart skipped a beat, but I forced myself to stay calm. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me nervous or shaken. He pretended not to see me at first, but then his eyes met mine. I smiled politely, keeping my distance, but making it clear I wasn't afraid. It was strange seeing him outside of the home, stripped of the power he tried to assert at dinner. I realized in that moment that power isn't always physical or loud. It can be quiet, composed, and confident. I was learning a lesson I hadn't expected. Sometimes control comes from how you carry yourself, not what you say. Later that evening, I called Jake to talk about the encounter. He sounded guilty over the phone, apologizing for not standing up more during dinner. "I didn't know how to handle him," he admitted, his voice heavy. I reassured him gently. "Jake, it's not your job to fight my battles. Your support is enough. The important thing is that I didn't let him break me." He was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "I just hate seeing you hurt like that." I felt a pang of sympathy for him, too. He was torn between his family loyalty and his feelings for me. But I realized that even though he loved me, I couldn't rely on him to always protect me. That strength had to come from within. The next week, Greg tried subtly to undermine me in front of Jake's friends during a small gathering. His comments were passive-aggressive, laced with thinly veiled insults about my background and career. I caught every word but didn't react immediately. Instead, I observed him, keeping my composure. I realized that reacting in anger would only feed his ego. I had to choose my moment to respond and make it count. By the end of the evening, Greg looked frustrated. I had spoken calmly, answered with wit and clarity, and refused to engage in childish back and forths. The satisfaction of maintaining dignity was more powerful than any loud argument. A few days later, Jake told me something surprising. "I think my dad is starting to see you differently," he said, almost in disbelief. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Really?" I asked. Jake nodded. "He hasn't said it out loud, but the way he talks to you now, it's not as harsh. I think he's realizing you're not the same person he tried to insult." I felt a small, triumphant smile. It wasn't about winning, it was about setting boundaries and being respected for who I am. Even though it was subtle, this shift in Greg's behavior reminded me that standing up for myself wasn't just about confrontation, it was about earning recognition for my own worth. Over the next month, I noticed a change in myself more than anyone else. I walked taller, spoke clearly, and felt a growing confidence that hadn't existed before the first insult. Every interaction with Greg was no longer a source of anxiety, but a reminder of my own strength. Jake noticed too. He often commented on how proud he was of me, saying I had handled the situation better than he could have imagined. His support felt validating, but it wasn't necessary. I knew my own value now. I realized that the true victory wasn't in changing Greg or making him apologize. It was in transforming my fear into confidence. That self-respect became my shield, and for the first time, I felt untouchable in a way that had nothing to do with anyone else. A month after the first dinner disaster, Jake invited me to a family gathering again. My stomach twisted at the thought, but I reminded myself of the confidence I had built. This time, I wouldn't be the intimidated guest. As soon as I arrived, I noticed Greg trying to act casual, but his eyes betrayed a hint of wariness. He was expecting me to be the same timid girl he had insulted before, but that girl no longer existed. I smiled politely and greeted everyone, projecting calm assurance. The evening unfolded differently than I expected. Conversations were polite, and though Greg tried a few veiled jabs, they fell flat. I realized that showing composure in front of the people who once tried to belittle me had a power all its own. During that dinner, I noticed someone I hadn't paid attention to before, Greg's younger sister, Emily. She seemed quietly amused by the tension between my father and me, and she even winked subtly when Greg tried to provoke me. Later, Jake told me Emily had been watching the situation closely. "She thinks you handled him well," he whispered. It felt strange to have a member of the opposing side quietly supporting me, but it also showed me that even the most unlikely people can respect strength. That small act of solidarity gave me confidence. If I could earn the respect of someone in Greg's circle, maybe my presence here wasn't just tolerated, it could be accepted. I started to feel a sense of victory that wasn't tied to revenge, but to genuine self-assurance. Later that week, Greg cornered me in the hallway. My heart raced, but I refused to show fear. "He wants to talk," he said low. I nodded politely, ready to listen, but also ready to defend my boundaries. He started awkwardly, fumbling over words. "I may have misjudged you," he admitted. My eyes widened slightly, but I didn't let him see my surprise. I had prepared for confrontation, not an apology. "Thank you for saying that," I replied calmly, keeping my composure intact. It was a small step, but it marked a shift. Even the man who had insulted me seemed to recognize my strength. I realized that standing up for myself wasn't about humiliation, it was about respect, and respect could sometimes come from unexpected places. Jake and I went for a walk after the dinner incident. He seemed reflective, more aware of how much I had changed. "I can't believe how calm and collected you were," he admitted. "I would have blown up by now." I smiled gently. "Jake, it's not about reacting, it's about showing who you are. That's the power." He nodded, as if absorbing a lesson he hadn't learned before. It felt good to see him respect not just what I said, but the way I carried myself. This conversation strengthened our bond. Jake was learning too, learning to respect my independence and my ability to navigate his family without losing myself. And for the first time, I felt like we were truly on the same team, not just romantically, but as allies in life. Greg wasn't completely changed. There were still subtle tests, small provocations here and there, but now I was prepared. Each time he tried, I answered with grace, wit, or silence, depending on what the situation demanded. It became clear to me that patience was a weapon. Responding emotionally only gave him satisfaction. Staying calm and consistent revealed my true strength. I was no longer reacting. I was controlling the narrative, shaping my own story in his presence. By the end of the month, I noticed a quiet shift. Greg's attacks had decreased, and even Jake commented that he seemed less tense around me. It was proof that self-respect and patience could slowly dismantle even the most hostile behavior. Jake surprised me with an invitation to his friend's party, insisting I come. My first thought was anxiety, another social setting with people who might judge me, but I reminded myself of how far I'd come. I decided to go, armed with confidence and a clear sense of self. When I arrived, I noticed the difference immediately. I wasn't shrinking into the background, I was engaging people with ease. Even when Greg's distant relatives glanced my way, I met their stares with poise. The power of calm and collected presence was becoming my signature. Jake watched me closely, pride evident in his eyes. "See, you belong here," he whispered. I realized he wasn't just commenting on my social skills. He was acknowledging the inner strength I had cultivated since the dinner incident. During the party, Greg approached me with a drink in hand. There was a tentative smile on his face, a silent acknowledgement of the respect he now had for me. "You handle yourself well," he admitted quietly. My lips curved into a small, polite smile. It was a victory without a fight. I realized that some battles don't need fireworks, they need composure. Every insult, every cold glance had been a lesson in patience and strategy. I wasn't just surviving his attacks, I was thriving despite them. By the end of the evening, I felt an unfamiliar but welcome sense of triumph. Greg's minor gestures of acknowledgement were proof that I had shifted the dynamic without losing my dignity, a feeling far more satisfying than revenge could ever offer. Later that week, Jake and I had a deep conversation about his father and my experience. He admitted, "I didn't realize how hard that must have been," a hint of guilt in his tone. "I should have defended you more." I appreciated his honesty, but stayed firm. "Jake, this wasn't about you. It was about me standing my ground. I needed to prove to myself, not just you, that I could handle it." His expression softened, and for the first time, I felt truly understood by him. This moment strengthened our relationship. Jake's respect for my independence and resilience grew, and I realized that true love isn't about shielding each other from every conflict. It's about supporting each other while navigating it together. Greg continued to test me, but I had learned a crucial lesson. Silence can be more powerful than words. Each attempt to provoke me was met with a calm, measured response, or no response at all. His frustration became more apparent as he realized I was no longer the same person he could intimidate. I noticed the shift not just in him, but in the room. The energy I carried commanded attention without a single harsh word. By embracing patience and measured reactions, I discovered an inner strength I hadn't known I possessed. It was empowering,
a reminder that sometimes the most effective response is controlled composure. One evening, Jake's mother, who had always been quietly skeptical of me, approached me. She said softly, "I admire how you've handled Greg." My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't expecting praise from her, especially after all the initial judgment. It was a confirmation that my efforts weren't unnoticed. Each step I had taken, each moment I had chosen patience over anger, was paying off in ways I hadn't imagined. I realized that respect isn't demanded, it's earned through consistent integrity and composure. Jake witnessed the interaction and squeezed my hand, his eyes saying what words never could. In that moment, I felt a quiet victory, not over anyone else, but over fear and self-doubt. I was finally standing tall in a space that had once felt hostile. One afternoon, Jake pulled me aside with a serious expression. He said, "I need to tell you something about my dad." Hesitating. My heart skipped a beat. After everything, I wasn't sure if I was ready for another confrontation. He explained that Greg's harsh behavior stemmed from his own insecurities and the pressure he'd faced growing up. While it didn't excuse his words, it offered a perspective I hadn't considered before. Suddenly, the anger I carried felt heavier, more complicated. I realized empathy wasn't weakness. It was understanding. This revelation didn't erase the insults or the past, but it allowed me to release some of the bitterness that had weighed me down. I felt lighter, stronger, and more in control of my emotions. Despite the insight, another family dinner loomed, and I knew I had to be prepared. I planned my outfit, my conversation topics, even how I would respond if Greg tried anything. Confidence was my armor now.
Walking into the dining room, I felt the familiar tension, but this time I was ready. Greg shot a glance, probably anticipating the usual reaction, but I held my head high, smiling politely at everyone around the table. The difference was palpable. I no longer feared his judgment or approval. I was here on my terms, and every measured word I spoke reinforced the respect I was earning silently. Halfway through dinner, Greg made a subtle jab about my background, attempting to provoke a reaction. But I didn't flinch. I calmly responded with humor, turning his insult into a shared laugh at the table. The room went quiet for a moment, then laughter filled the air. Greg's surprise was obvious. He had expected me to crumble, but instead, I had neutralized his attempt with grace and wit. It felt exhilarating to claim control of the narrative without escalating conflict. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving his insults, I was reshaping the atmosphere entirely. After the dinner, Jake pulled me aside, pride shining in his eyes. "I couldn't be prouder," he said softly. "You handled everything perfectly." For once, I didn't need his protection. I had handled it myself, but his acknowledgement mattered. His support was different now, not about shielding me, but about affirming my strength. It was a new level of partnership, one built on mutual respect and trust. I realized that relationships grow not when problems disappear, but when you navigate them together, standing strong as equals. Jake and I had reached that stage, and it felt like an unspoken promise of a solid future. The week after the dinner, I noticed small changes. Greg's attitude softened, and even minor comments were no longer laced with hostility. Respect, I realized, had a subtle power far greater than revenge. I had transformed from the girl he once called street garbage to someone who commanded dignity through patience and composure. The inner growth was more significant than any external acknowledgement. It was proof I had evolved. That quiet victory, invisible to most but deeply felt by me, was the ultimate triumph. I had stood my ground, maintained my integrity, and emerged stronger without sacrificing who I was. A few days later, I started receiving strange messages on my phone, cryptic, passive-aggressive comments from Greg. He was testing me, trying to provoke an emotional reaction. I could feel my pulse quicken, but I refused to reply. Instead, I saved the messages, documenting every word.
This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about having evidence if things escalated further. Taking control in silence felt empowering in a way yelling never could. At night, I reflected on how far I'd come. A year ago, I would have panicked, cried, or stormed off. Now, I had patience, strategy, and self-respect. And that made all the difference. Jake revealed something that shook me. Greg had a hidden past, financial troubles that explained some of his bitterness. He'd been projecting insecurity onto everyone around him, especially me, the outsider. Hearing this, I felt a complicated mix of anger and sympathy. It didn't excuse the insults, but it offered context. Understanding the roots of cruelty gave me a strange sense of clarity. I no longer felt powerless. Together, Jake and I began discussing how to navigate the tension without compromising our peace. Knowledge, I realized, was the first step towards freedom from fear. Another family gathering arrived, and this time I wasn't just prepared, I was determined. Greg tried a pointed remark about my background, expecting a reaction. But I took a deep breath and spoke clearly, asserting my dignity. You can call me what you want, but I know who I am. I held his gaze. The room went quiet, all eyes on us. For once, I wasn't defensive. I was in control. The weight lifted. It was a victory, not measured in applause, but in the power of my own voice. I realized I had transformed. My self-respect was now louder than his insults. Jake surprised me by standing beside me during that confrontation. He didn't speak for me, but his presence reinforced my stance. The silent support of someone who truly believed in me felt incredible. Afterwards, we left the dinner together. On the ride home, he squeezed my hand. "You handled that perfectly," he said. "I couldn't have done it better myself." I smiled, realizing our relationship had shifted from love to partnership. I began to understand that strength isn't just individual, it's shared. When two people stand together, respect multiplies and fear diminishes.
Later that night, I sat by my window, reflecting on the journey. From being belittled to standing firm, every step had taught me patience, strategy, and courage. I felt proud, not just for surviving, but for thriving. I thought about the future, how I would handle Greg, how I would maintain my dignity, and how Jake and I could continue building a life grounded in mutual respect. The path ahead was challenging, but I felt prepared. For the first time, I realized that being called street garbage didn't define me. How I responded did. And in that response, I had claimed my true power. The next week brought a surprise. My best friend, Lila, showed up at my apartment unannounced. She had heard about the tension with Greg and came to support me. Her presence was comforting, like a warm shield against all the negativity. We spent hours talking, laughing, and venting. It reminded me how crucial it is to surround yourself with people who genuinely care. For the first time in months, I felt like the storm outside had no power over me. By the end of the night, I realized that support doesn't have to come from everyone in your life. It just has to come from the right people. And with Lila by my side, I felt ready to face anything. The tension at family gatherings was escalating again. Greg was clearly plotting something. I could feel the energy shift the moment we arrived. This time, I decided not to react impulsively. Instead, I prepared mentally, rehearsing calm responses and ways to maintain my dignity. Anticipating his attacks gave me an edge, and for once, I wasn't fearful. I was ready. When he made his first jab, I smiled politely and shifted the conversation. The room seemed to notice the difference. I was no longer the easy target. I could feel a quiet respect forming, not from fear, but from confidence. One afternoon, I found myself reflecting on how much I'd changed. I wasn't seeking revenge or approval anymore.
I had discovered a quiet power that came from knowing my worth. I realized that silence could be more effective than words sometimes. By refusing to rise to insults, I turned Greg's attempts to belittle me into empty noise. His power over me had vanished without a single dramatic scene. That evening, I looked in the mirror and smiled. The girl who had cried alone in her room months ago was gone, replaced by someone resilient, self-aware, and unshakable. Jake's loyalty was tested when his father tried to pit us against each other. He whispered manipulations, hoping Jake would doubt my character. But Jake didn't flinch. Instead, he reaffirmed his support, standing firmly by my side. Seeing him choose me, not just in words but in actions, brought a wave of relief and love. It wasn't about proving anything to Greg anymore. It was about the trust and bond Jake and I had built. I realized relationships are truly tested in moments of adversity. Loyalty, respect, and understanding are worth more than any temporary approval or peace at the dinner table. By now, I knew this situation had a limit. I couldn't live perpetually on edge around Greg's insults, nor could Jake shield me forever. Something had to give, a final, definitive closure. I started planning my approach carefully, considering not just the words I'd use, but the atmosphere I wanted to create. I didn't want drama. I wanted resolution, dignity, and a clear boundary. For the first time, I felt a sense of control that wasn't just reactive. It was proactive. I knew the next encounter could either break me or solidify the new me, and I was ready for it. The night before confronting Greg, I couldn't sleep, but this time it wasn't fear keeping me awake. It was a plan. I replayed every insult he had thrown at me, every moment of humiliation, and I let them feel my strategy. I wasn't going in to simply defend myself anymore. I was going in to make him regret ever underestimating me. Every word, every gesture would be calculated to expose him and reveal the truth about his behavior. By morning, I felt unstoppable. I wasn't just reclaiming my dignity. I was preparing to show Greg that power isn't taken, it's earned, and I was ready to take it back in full. Dinner began like any other. Greg, sharp-eyed and smug, thinking he could intimidate me with a single comment. He sneered, "You really don't belong here," fully expecting me to flinch.
Instead, I leaned in, steady and composed, and said, "I may not belong in your twisted world, Greg, but I'm perfectly comfortable in my own. And honestly, your behavior speaks louder about you than me." The room went silent. Shock registered across his face. I had planted the seed of doubt in everyone's minds, subtly exposing his cruelty without saying it outright. It was small, precise, and sweet. My revenge wasn't loud, but it stung where it mattered. As Greg sputtered, flustered by my words, Jake's mother unexpectedly interjected. "Enough, Greg," she said, her voice calm but sharp. "This isn't how a civilized family behaves." Her words were a dagger disguised as wisdom. Greg's authority crumbled in that instant, and I couldn't hide my satisfaction. Not only had I held my ground, but I had also turned someone inside his own circle against him. I caught Jake's eye, and he looked at me differently for the first time. Proud, maybe even slightly fearful of what I might do next. The momentum had shifted. My revenge had begun. Over the next few days, I started planting small truths with people Greg thought he controlled. Little comments, reminders of his rude behavior, stories of his outbursts, all shared in quiet, casual ways. It wasn't public humiliation, but it was effective. Slowly, people began to see the real Greg, the man who tore others down to feel superior. I watched the respect he had once enjoyed slowly slip away. And it felt amazing. I realized revenge wasn't about yelling or hurting,
It was about precision, patience, and letting karma play its part while you maintain control. The moment of ultimate satisfaction came when Greg tried to assert dominance again at a family gathering, but the room was no longer his stage. Whispers, subtle glances, and quiet laughter reminded him of every moment he had underestimated me. I stood tall, fully composed, letting him fumble while I smiled internally. I didn't need to confront him further. The universe, and a few carefully placed words, had done it for me. Finally, I felt a release that was more powerful than any confrontation. Vindication. I had survived, I had grown, and now Greg was powerless to affect me ever again. Revenge, done with grace and intelligence, was sweeter than I had imagined. A week later, I received an unexpected invitation to a private family brunch. Greg, of course, expected me to arrive intimidated, maybe apologetic. I walked in with confidence, holding my head high. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Greg's attempts at superiority were met with polite indifference, subtle smirks from others, and whispers that made him visibly uneasy. I realized then that the tiniest hint of respect for me had vanished from his eyes forever. I stood down calmly, letting the tension build. I didn't need to raise my voice. My presence, my composure, and the subtle knowledge I had planted in others were doing all the work. During brunch, Jake hesitated before speaking. Finally, he admitted, almost reluctantly, "I think I underestimated you." His words were awkward, but they carried weight. It wasn't just Jake. I noticed subtle gestures from the rest of the family. The power Greg had wielded for years was quietly crumbling, and I knew that I had orchestrated it without even lifting a finger to confront him physically. For the first time, I realized revenge doesn't have to be loud. It's about control, timing, and letting people witness the truth of who you really are and who they really are. A week later, Greg tried to post on social media about how family unity was being ruined. I saw the perfect opportunity. I shared my side, the truth of his insults, the way he tried to shame me, and the careful way I had navigated the situation. The response was overwhelming. Messages of support poured in, and even some distant relatives who had previously avoided conflict began reaching out. Greg's credibility was gone. His version of events no longer mattered. The revenge was complete, subtle but unmistakable. The man who had called me street garbage was now publicly exposed, powerless and alone in his arrogance. With Greg finally out of my life, I focused on what truly mattered: my growth, my dreams, and my relationships with people who respected me. Jake, who had been torn between loyalty to his father and me, finally understood my strength. I didn't dwell on anger anymore. I had turned it into motivation. Every insult, every humiliation had become fuel, and now I could walk forward without fear, without doubt, and without regret. It felt incredible to realize that revenge had served its purpose, not just to punish, but to empower me. The final closure came quietly. Greg reached out, trying to act contrite, but I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My dignity, my respect, and my sense of self-worth were intact. He had no power over me anymore. I looked around at my life, the friends who supported me, the family who believed in me, and the new opportunities opening every day, and I smiled. Victory didn't come from shouting or fighting. It came from patience, intelligence, and knowing my worth. I had survived, I had thrived, and I had proven, most importantly, to myself, that no one, no matter how cruel, could ever define me again. Revenge was sweet, but freedom was sweeter. Sometimes the deepest kind of revenge isn't about getting even.
It's about rising so high that the people who tried to drag you down can't even reach you anymore. In my journey, I learned that dignity, patience, and self-worth are far louder than any insult thrown across a dinner table. But let me ask you this. Have you ever been underestimated, dismissed, or called something cruel, only to later prove to yourself, and maybe to them, that you were so much stronger than they believed? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. Your story might inspire someone else who is silently fighting their own battle for respect. If this story resonated with you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs the reminder that no one has the power to define you unless you let them. Thank you for listening to my journey, for spending this time with me, and for being a part of a community that chooses strength, compassion, and freedom. Wherever you are in your own story, I wish you peace, courage, and the unshakable knowledge that you are worthy.